Zombies are often associated with popular culture. Every other episode on Netflix and Amazon Prime features hordes of zombies threatening humanity's survival. However, you may not be aware that the concept of zombies was inspired by real-life events. There was a time when zombies roamed the streets with us. In the Italian streets, on the streets of Venice, noblemen and peasants alike were frequently seen with missing facial portions, rotting flesh, and exposed muscle and bone. Patients would drag themselves around and parts of their body would fall off. Italy's Renaissance period has a major, though little known, dark side. Sailors returning from the New World brought with them a massive outbreak of syphilis, which spread through an entire French army. The troops then brought what would become known as the Great Pox to the rest of Europe. With no such thing as antibiotics back then, the disease was able to spread unchecked, and its effects were nasty. The skin on victims' faces would essentially rot away from the disease's grisly ulcers. In some cases, the noses, lips, or other body parts of the affected people were essentially gone, and several of the victims eventually died from the disease. So while there was a lot to love about the Renaissance in Europe, the concurrent syphilis outbreak was basically the real-world version of the zombie apocalypse. The year was 1494. Italy was basking in the glory of the Renaissance. There were flamboyant dresses, parties, and promiscuity. Philosophy was at its peak and artists were free to express their creativity in their works. It was a time of great learning, art, and culture, and diseases. Italy's Renaissance had a dark side. With resources, people were fulfilled and happy, and with more resources, the Italians started venturing out to foreign lands in a quest for gold and glory. However, when the sailors returned, along with gold and glory, they brought foreign, unknown diseases. So they brought home gold, glory, and syphilis. The real source of syphilis that crippled Europe's Renaissance is much debated upon. The English and Italians called it the French disease. The French called it the disease of Naples. The Russians called it the Polish disease. The Polish and the Persians called it the Turkish disease. The Turkish called it the Christian disease. In India it was called the Portuguese disease. In Japan it was called the Chinese pox, and there are some references to it being called the Persian fire. The effects of syphilis were so horrendous that it made their own pox disease minuscule. They demoted their own pox disease to smallpox and upgraded syphilis to the Great Pox. Nevertheless, the disease which was called the Great Pox spread to the whole of Europe. With no antibiotics and cure, the pace of the disease remained unchecked and sent Europe to a near doomsday experience. The effects of the disease were nasty. The first well-recorded European outbreak of what is now known as syphilis occurred in 1495 among French troops besieging Naples, Italy. It may have been transmitted to the French via Spanish mercenaries serving King Charles of France in that siege. From this center, the disease swept across Europe. As Jared Diamond describes it, when syphilis was first definitely recorded in Europe in 1495, its pustules often covered the body from the head to the knees, caused flesh to fall from people's faces, and led to death within a few months. The disease then was much more lethal than it is today. The epidemiology of this first syphilis epidemic shows that the disease was either new or a mutated form of an earlier disease. It was not uncommon to see noblemen and peasant alike on the streets of Venice missing parts of their face, with rotting flesh and exposed muscle and bone. Patients would drag themselves around and body parts would literally drop off them. So while there was a lot to love about the Renaissance in Europe, like the art and whatnot, the syphilis outbreak was basically the real-world version of the zombie apocalypse.